All right, well, welcome everybody. Can I just get a quick thumbs up that our sound and everything is working well? Yeah, great. Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Lou Herman. I am the director of the University Writing Center. Here to present to you today a little bit of everything in regards to writing. We're going to talk a little bit about plagiarism, citation styles, and why we cite, how to cite, and then we're going to cover some mechanical aspects of writing that hopefully they're really high level things so that you can implement those in whatever discipline, whatever field you are working in. So give me just a moment here. We're going to pull up my PowerPoint for you. Yes, there we go. Does it look good? Cool. All right. So again, like I said, Dr. Lou Herman, I am the director of the Writing Center. We are going to cover writing aspects today. So let's start with plagiarism. This is always a big topic for a lot of students, only because this is what they concern themselves most with. And I'll be honest with you, plagiarism, if you get caught for doing it, it's a big deal, but it's really easy to avoid. And so it's not necessarily something that you have to keep in the front of your mind when you're writing. As long as you know you're not doing it, you're safe. Plagiarism is mostly intentional. And so we're going to talk about plagiarism, and we're going to talk about integrating sources so that we can avoid the plagiarism. And then as you see here, we have active and passive voice for clarity as part of the mechanical aspect of the presentation today. So what is plagiarism? You see on your screen now, we have the definition of plagiarism: the appropriation, buying, receiving, or a gift, or obtaining any means another's work, and the unacknowledged submission or incorporation of one's own academic work. Basically, what the gist of this is saying is if you pass somebody else's work off as your own, then you are considered to be a plagiarizer. As long as you are not intentionally doing this, it is not necessarily plagiarism. It all depends on, who ends up getting your work. But like I said, as long as you're not intentionally doing this, it's not necessarily something that you have to worry about. So quickly, let's just talk about this in terms of what does intentionality mean. The appropriation of someone else's work to pass it on as your own for credit. That includes things like copy and pasting from websites, from articles, from other students' works. This does happen quite a bit. You can also plagiarize yourself. This happens most often when you write a paper for one class and then maybe you want to use it for another class and you turn it in for a second class. This is plagiarizing yourself for a couple of reasons. One, something you may not be aware of is when you produce knowledge and papers, essays for a class, that knowledge and paper, the text that you create, is actually the intellectual property of both you and the instructor of that class. And so to use that paper for another class, there have been instances when I teach where I've allowed students to use papers from other classes, but you need to get the permission from both professors to do that. And often what will happen is you'll go to one and you'll say, hey, I want to use part of this paper for another class. They'll say, cool. You go to the other professor and say, from this previous class, I want to use this paper. They might allow you to use parts of it, but they certainly, at least I would hope, not allow you to use the entire thing without changing something. So be careful when you are using work that you have already produced for a class, for another class, because that can turn into plagiarism. Obviously, these other things are fairly not so common, but they do happen, using someone else's paper from that different section of a class, and then claiming someone else's work as your own original work. So as you can see, these are fairly easy things to avoid. If you are conducting yourself ethically, if you are doing your own research and following your mentorship from your instructors, this shouldn't be a problem. A lot of times I see students put more effort into plagiarizing than it would have taken to just do the work. And so it's kind of a balance of labor that you have to figure out. And it's far easier to do the work rather than plagiarize the work. This is always a big point of contention. What isn't plagiarism? And so, particularly here at the Writing Center, we see a lot of students who come in concerned with plagiarism. And they feel that if they forget to cite something, or if they cite something incorrectly, that is considered plagiarism. That's not the case. Citing something incorrectly, missing a citation, just as an anecdote, I once had a professor being a student for missing a comma in their in-text citation and wanted to report them to the Office of Student Conduct for plagiarism for missing a comma in a citation. That is not plagiarism. Error in citation is just that, an error. When you paraphrase something from someone else's work, as long as you are citing it, you are not plagiarizing. Paraphrasing, and we're going to go over paraphrasing a little bit more later on in the presentation, but paraphrasing is taking someone else's work, creating typically a shorter narrative of that information so that it's easy for your reader to digest. As long as you cite it, it's not plagiarism. And then this last one, common knowledge, is kind of hard to describe, but common knowledge comes in the form of things that we all typically know just as being humans. So the example I like to use is if I write a paper that says dogs run fast, the grass is green, the sky is blue, and I run that through a plagiarism checker, it's probably going to come back 100% plagiarized. But those are things that we all know and that we don't necessarily have to cite. What we do have to cite is any knowledge that isn't easily accessible by a regular audience. And so I'm not talking about, people in your field, but a little bit wider in terms of what you're studying or what you're trying to communicate. So in your field and wider than your field, if people wouldn't necessarily understand this, then you are probably going to need to cite it. The other thing that you definitely need to cite is like new knowledge, theories, practices, best practices, other things that come from people's work at the university, people's work in their professional lives, things that they create from their own knowledge that you should cite. There was one more thing I wanted to say about this. If I remember, I'll come back to it. But these are the what aren't plagiarism. So don't get yourself caught up in trying to figure out whether or not you plagiarized. As long as you are intentionally or not intentionally plagiarizing, using someone else's work as your own, you are good to go. So that was quickly on plagiarism. Are there any questions about that before we move on? And just to let you all know, we have Angel here. He's moderating the chat room. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat and he will let me know if I'm rambling and you need to ask a question. So any questions on plagiarism before we move on to avoiding plagiarism? Cool. Well, if anything comes up, just pop it in the chat and we will move on. So integrating sources, this is going to be an important aspect of your research. You all are in graduate school at this point, and so research and sourcing materials are not only important for you to contribute to the field, but for the building of new knowledge. That's really what we are here and doing when you get to graduate school. It's not so much a thing in undergraduate, but when you get to graduate school, you are becoming experts in your field and you are becoming the source of new knowledge. And so using sources that come before you is vital for your continued progression. I'm sorry, that says APA. It should say, why do we use formatting styles? But there's a whole bunch of different formatting styles out there, depending on what field you're in. I'm in the humanities, so obviously we use a lot of APA. You've probably also heard of MLA, Chicago style, IEEE, ASA, AMA, Southwest Naturalist style. There's just all sorts of them out there. And so what's important to know about formatting styles is that they create a unified and continuous method for knowledge seeking. That's a really high language way to describe it. We're going to talk about it a little bit more, but it does all of these things for you using a formatting style. It helps you avoid plagiarism. It gives that continuity of information seeking for your reader. It shows your own diligence and credibility in your writing, both for your argument and you as a researcher. And most importantly, what it does, the formatting style, provides a roadmap for other researchers when they come to your work and they use your work to build new knowledge based on what you have created. So we're going to talk about all of these things. The continuity of information seeking. So in graduate school and beyond in the professional world, as you continue to publish articles, as you continue to write essays for your class, you are standing on the shoulders of the people that have come before you. You are using their work to further the knowledge, to progress the field with that knowledge. And so by using previous work, you are able to move that field forward into new knowledge. And really what formatting styles do is give us an opportunity to follow that line of information. Where did you get this information from, and where did that person get that information from? How did we get from point A to point B? That's one of the big reasons that we use formatting styles. The other reason is when you come to a paper to read it, if you know right away that, hey, this journal uses IEEE style, automatically in your head, you should start thinking about, okay, so this is how it should be organized. This is how I should find the information in terms of resources and sources that the original author used. All of those things start clicking into your head so that you can read through the content of the paper a lot easier. And then finally, it just standardizes how we find the information so that we can be efficient in our research. When we come to a paper, we know how to go to a site references page or a bibliography and immediately be able to retrieve the original source that the author used. So the continuity of information seeking helps progress the field forward. It gives you diligence as a researcher. And what I mean by that is when you use previous sources in your own research, you are showing your reader that you understand the field, you understand the subject that you are trying to communicate, and that you are becoming an expert and should be taken seriously as a communicator of this new knowledge. And so when we do our integration of sources, we are showing that we can have a conversation with our previous knowledge creators, with the sources that we are using, and that we can expand upon what they did not. And so it's important to show your reader that you understand what's come before you so that you can move forward with it. It shows both sides of a topic typically. I see a lot of times research that doesn't understand the contrary part of the research. And it's important for you as a researcher to show your reader that not only do you understand what you are trying to accomplish, but you're also able to understand what is contrary or what is opposite or what has failed. These are also very important points of research to show your readers as both a diligent researcher and for moving the field forward. It shows that you're well-versed in the foundation of your argument. You understand all the things that have led up to this point. And again, I'm just going to harp on this quite a bit. You are establishing yourself as an emerging expert in the field when you do diligent research. That all then leads to credibility for both your argument and for you as a researcher. Understanding the multiple perspectives of an issue, both sides of an argument, both the success and failures of experiments is showing your reader again that you are able to engage in this material in an ethical and fruitful way that moves the field forward. You can speak to the future once you do this. Once you have established yourself as an expert in this field, that's where you get the opportunity to create the new knowledge. And so showing the things that came before allows you to communicate the things that are still to come. And it just opens up the field to a wider understanding of the issues. When you create credible arguments based on research that has come before, and you hopefully will one day be the person that is also cited by new knowledge creators in the future. And so that's, again, part of the continuity of information and establishing yourself as this person in the field so that once you're done with your research, there's going to be more people doing similar research and building upon what you have already created. And so these are the big kind of global reasons that we have formatting styles and we have citation styles. So that we can continue creating this new knowledge, we can continue moving our fields forward, and we can do it ethically within those fields. Let me see. Yeah, so this is going to start leading us into our section on integrating our sources. But as an expert in your field, you want to show your reader that you understand everything. And by integrating sources of someone else's voice along with your voice, helps you establish that. And we're going to do that by putting these things into conversations. I know it's a weird thing to say, but really what you should be aiming to achieve is using someone else's previous knowledge and building upon that by pretending like you're having a conversation. The source says one thing, you are going to be responding and answering or contradicting what that source says to help build that knowledge. And so this is just kind of, again, one of my soapboxes that research and knowledge and progress do not exist in a bubble. We have to operate research in a web of informed knowledge, meaning that we need to touch on a whole lot of different things, not just the things that agree with us, and not just the things that make our research relevant. We need to understand the entirety of the field so that we can continue to create that new knowledge. So any questions on integrating sources?
There was one question from Ms. Lourdes Garcia. She's asking if you could give a little more information about the opposing side. I think going back to about 2 slides, to what extent should we talk about opposing views?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends a lot on how much it progresses the knowledge. I don't think it needs to be a 50-50 split, but at least acknowledging that there is a contradicting argument or something else on the other side, acknowledging the fact that these things exist, and then maybe providing your own, analysis of why it's a contradiction or why it doesn't work is enough to at least show that you understand there are 2 sides to whatever argument you are trying to create out there. So not 50-50, but at least acknowledge the other side of an argument so that your readers know that there is a conversation happening out there. Great question, thank you. Any other questions at the moment? No? Cool. So now that we understand plagiarism, we understand the reason that we have all these ridiculous formatting styles and the purpose that they serve, let's talk a little bit how to operate within them. And so I like to start with this on how to use citations in terms of the big aspects that you should identify with every single source that you are working with. And this comes into play whether you have done a deep dive into a source or whether you have just skimmed a source. You should at least identify these 4 pieces of information. And so identify the type of source. And what I mean by that, is it a book? Is it a magazine? Is it a journal? Is it an e-text? What is the type of source that you are working with? Identify the important information within that source. That is going to be your author or authors. It is going to be the date of publication, the medium of publication. And what I mean by medium is it a physical copy? Is it an electronic copy? How did you access this information? Any of the ancillary stuff like publishers, locations in terms of the library, if it's a physical copy, or locations on the web. One of the things you have to be very careful about is identifying web URLs. They're not always stable. And so a lot of citation styles ask for a stable link. And what they mean by a stable link is a link that no matter where the website goes or what the website does, you can still look up that same article from that website. And the way that this has kind of become a thing in our technology age is with DOIs. And DOIs, I equate them to social security numbers. They're the social security number of whatever web text journal that you're using, and that DOI number will refer to that article in perpetuity. And so looking for those DOI numbers, we do have Jacob here with us. Do most databases use DOI now?
Yeah, most citation. Hi everyone, this is Jacob Galindo. I'm one of the librarians here at UTEP. So most sources that you find in databases are going to have DOIs, digital object identifier numbers. And yeah, like Lou said, that's a really good way of looking at it. It's the social security number of those items, articles, books, whatever digital items that you find.
And yeah, again, it's just a stable thing that never changes with the artifact. And so wherever you are, whenever you are, you should be able to use that DOI number to look up the original source. And again, that goes back to the idea of continuity and information seeking. You know, in 50 years when Google crashes and we have something new, hopefully those DOIs will remain and we'll still be able to look up that information. Third part of this is identifying how you are using the information, and this is going to be a little bit later in the presentation, but how do you want to communicate the information from this text? Do you want to summarize? Do you want to paraphrase? Or do you want to direct quote? And those are the three main ways that we use information from our texts, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about those later. And then creating the roadmap. What I mean by this, and I'm going to show you an infographic, a graphic about what this is, but the citation styles, all citation styles do the same things in terms of creating roadmaps for the reader. If you imagine your in-text citation leads you to your references page, and your references page leads you to the original source, that's the roadmap that we are trying to create for our reader, because at the end of the day, really what we want to do is we want to provide our reader with the original material that we used to create our source for a couple of reasons. One, when I read things, sometimes I come across a quote or a paraphrase and I say, hey, that's really cool. I want to go learn more about this subject, or I want to see what the author is also talking about. You have led me to the source so that I can gather that information. The other reason is to just check up, make sure that these are legitimate sources, make sure that they come from reliable and ethical sources. We want to make sure that we are using information that participates in the higher education process of knowledge seeking and creating. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit.
We do have one other question.
Great.
Yes, if there is no DOI number, is it fine to not supply it?
So I would recommend doing your best to either find the DOI number or find a link to the website. If you cannot find a DOI, you will want to give the URL from where you retrieved it and the date from when you retrieved it. For a couple of reasons, and this also depends on what citation style you're using. They have a couple of different methods, but luckily we live in an age where every web page is cached by Google in perpetuity, as far as I know. So you can go back and look at web pages that existed in the early 2000s as they existed in the early 2000s. So if you have a URL and a date that you retrieved it, that should be enough information for the reader to also locate that source. Cool, great questions. I appreciate those, folks. Okay, so we're going to go back and talk about identifying the types of sources, mediums. So here's just a short list. This isn't a comprehensive list, but books, articles, newspapers, anything relating to text that we have to read, both physical and electronic, are one type of medium. We have visual sources as well. This includes YouTube, websites with images. Obviously, it depends on whether or not we're using images or we are using text from websites, but it can be visual on a website as well. And then reports, like on the news, on Spotify, on the different kind of communications that we get. If it's a news report, this is also visual. And then podcasts. This includes interviews, broadcasts, anything that is audio without a visual aspect. So this is an important piece to first identify. This is the big piece to identify when you are identifying your type of source and the medium through which it is communicated. From there, you're going to want to jot down your author or authors of the piece, the date it was created, published, put out to the public to consume, the title of the piece, whether it's a book, news article, podcast, you'll want the title of it. Again, there's the location, the medium, and the publisher. And what I mean by location is where did we find this? Did we find this through the New York Times? Did we find this through the Washington Post? Did we find this through Spotify? Did we find this in the library as a physical copy? And so that helps us kind of suss out the medium and the publisher as well. But location, what I mean is the big global. Was this a CNN news article? Was this a Joe Rogan podcast? Where was the location? And then your retrieval, that's the DOI for the web texts that we were talking about, URLs. Sometimes it's even fun, it's a good idea to just jot down your library location so that you can, you don't have to go look it up on the database again. You can go and retrieve that physical copy if you need to go back to it once again. And keep in mind, those, what do we call them now? The decimal,
The call numbers?
yeah.
Yeah.
Those change between libraries, right?
Not necessarily. So a public library might have the Dewey Decimal System. An academic library, all academic libraries should have what's called the Library of Congress subject headings.
Okay,
So those should, between universities, those should stay the same.
okay, good to know. I didn't know that. But keep that information handy because you never know when you need to go back to it, or if you're in another place and you need to pull out that source, it'd be a lot easier to go and get it. So here's that roadmap that I was talking about in terms of why we cite and what it does for our reader. This first part, this is the in-text thing. This is intended to be non-intrusive, right? That's why we, at least in APA, most citation styles are non-intrusive in their in-text citation style. But it shouldn't take away from the reader's ability to continue reading through the paper. So that's why we have it shortened to just the author and the date. Typically, again, check your citation style, depending on what it is. There's a little bit of difference between them, but the two main things are your author and your date. I have the page number up there just because depending on how you're using the quote or the source, you may need to include a page number. And again, this is just retrieval for your reader. After we have that in-text citation leads us to our reference page or our bibliography page where we have the entirety of the entry for the source. And that gives us all the information: author, date, title, location, medium, permanent retrieval location. And then that page leads us to the source. And so don't think about citation styles in terms of how we are avoiding plagiarism, but rather it's an ease for your reader to access the same information that you have accessed to create this knowledge. And again, that's how we spread the knowledge and that's how we grow the knowledge. So make sure that you're building that roadmap for your reader through your citation styles. Any questions on citations? Nothing yet, great. So then let's talk about how we actually use information to cite it. I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's three main ways. There is a direct quote, there is a paraphrase, and there is a summary method for using source information in our own work. Direct quotes are good for small pieces of information. Less than 70 words is about the limit. If you are trying to quote something that is greater than 70 words, you might want to consider paraphrasing rather than direct quoting. But there are times and opportunities to have a longer direct quote if it is relevant and does not take the reader out of what you are trying to communicate. And again, depending on your citation style, that could take the form of a block quote. It could take the form of a footnote, an endnote, an appendices. There's a lot of different ways that we can do it. But direct quoting is when we just put it in quotes and we use the author's information exactly as it appears in the original source that we are using. We don't change anything. We don't correct any spelling or grammar mistakes. We use it exactly as it has appeared in the original work. I say here it should be used sparingly. And what I mean by that is when you are writing your research, particularly at this level, we want to hear your voice. And so when you are using a whole lot of sources in your materials, it should be about an 80-20, 70-30 split. And that's 80 your voice, 20 source voice. Longer pieces, theses, dissertations might have a little bit higher ratio in terms of like 70-30 your voice, 70 author's voice or source voice, 30. But really, we want to hear your voice in these things. And if we see a whole lot, at least in my field, if I see a whole lot of quotations and citations, then I don't feel like the author of the piece is giving me enough information on what they're thinking about or what they're trying to accomplish. And so make sure that you're not using source material too heavily because it can take over your writing. Paraphrase is the next step. This is for longer, bigger ideas, over 70 words, sometimes things that span maybe a chapter or two. It might be across a couple of pieces of work that an author has produced, but paraphrasing condenses a big idea into easier to digest material. So ideas, theories, remarks that span multiple paragraphs and pages is when we want to use the paraphrase. And then summary is just for the larger ideas, arguments, concepts, big global aspects of writing. Sometimes you may need to just summarize an entire author's theory on something, or maybe you need to summarize an entire piece of work from a single author. Summary, paraphrase, and direct quoting. These are the three methods. All of these methods, and we'll talk about, I think we'll show you some citations in this, but all three of these methods still need an in-text citation and a bibliographic reference entry on your final page. Again, building that roadmap. Anytime you use someone else's work, whether you direct quote, paraphrase, or summarize, you will need to cite it. So let's do it. Quotations for shorter passages, paraphrasing for larger chunks, summary to capture huge pieces of information. Pardon me. I'm gonna show you some examples. This is just reiterating, supporting your points, providing evidence. These are some of the reasons why we use citations to support your argument. Providing evidence to your argument gives that contrary point of view so that you have something else to argue on top, and then it gives credit to the original author. So quickly, here is a way that it can look in terms of the same idea. In his famous and influential work, The Interpretation of Dreams, Sigmund Freud argues that dreams are, quote, royal road to the unconscious, unquote, page number citation, expressing in coded imagery the dreamer's unfulfilled wishes through a process known as the dream work, page number. Notice that we have cited both of these direct quote entries, and that's an important piece to note. If you are direct quoting, your citation should appear at the very end of the quote. And I'm see if my cursor pops up on here. A couple minutia to point out. Please keep in mind that we end with a quote. We have a space, we have our parentheses, whatever goes in our parentheses, end parentheses, and then our punctuation, whatever it might be. In this case, it's a comma, so it's outside of the parentheses. Notice our period down here is also outside. Your sentences should always, yes, I'll give you the one exception. Your sentences should always end with a piece of punctuation. The only exception is if you're writing in Chicago style, your superscript for the footnote appears outside of the punctuation as the last item. But make sure that you're ending with punctuation. So quotation, we have quoted Sigmund Freud here, we have our citation, we have another direct quote, and we have our citation. If we were to paraphrase the same work, we're going to say, according to Freud, actual but unacceptable desires are censored internally and subjected to coding through layers of condensation and displacement before emerging in a kind of rebus puzzle in the dream itself. This is a condensation. I'm going to use that word twice. Interesting. This is a distillation of what we have here in the first piece in our own words, but it's still Freud's idea. And so it's important that we, again, attribute what we have said to our original author. And again, same sort of thing. We're going to have our citation in here. I know it says page number. It should say like author date on this one. And this one should say author date page number. But I just wanted to put something in there to show you where the citation goes. So quotation, paraphrasing. These are the two most common types of citation styles. And so we want to make sure that we are using our sources appropriately when integrating them into our work. So some more examples. A quote, direct quote in the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the character Veruca Salt is famous for saying, "But Daddy, I want an Oompa Loompa now." We have our date in there. It's a movie, so the citation's a little bit different. But the idea is we have directly quoted from the piece of the artifact that we are using for our essay, and we are citing it appropriately after those quotation marks. Paraphrasing, in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the first child to be eliminated is Augustus Gloop, who falls into the chocolate river after gorging himself on various edible plants in Wonka's garden. Notice this is a smaller piece of the movie, if you're familiar with it, or the book. This is not the entirety of the story. This is a smaller piece of the story. This is like a chapter or so in the book and in the movie. And so it's not exactly something that we can direct quote, but it's not a larger idea in terms of what the overall thematic aspect of the book is trying to communicate. So then we get to the summary aspect. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a film about a boy who wins a trip into a reclusive chocolatier's incredible factory, encountering strange creatures and wondrous sights along the way. Notice I'm pointing at my screen with a laser pointer like they can all see it. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, parentheses 2005. We could talk a little bit about where to put these citations, these parenthetical citations, because there's two appropriate methods. What you're seeing here and what we have here are the two differences. We can have it at the end of our entry, and we can also have it after our first author part of the entry. So in this case, it's a movie. If we were to have an author here, Roald Dahl, parentheses 2005, and then all this information, or according to so-and-so, parentheses, date. And then at the end of the paragraph, we would have, or at the end of the summary, we would have more information. But there are two appropriate ways to insert your citations into the paraphrase and the summary, depending on how you are introducing the information. So, hot tip: sources are meant to support your ideas. Use them as a way to make your own points stronger and more convincing. Again, this is just how you're building credibility, creating new knowledge, understanding the field, and communicating to your audience that you are an emerging expert in this idea. So that's kind of crash course on integrating sources. Questions, comments, concerns, scathing criticisms? No, let me grab a swig of water real quick. Okay, so using active and passive voice, this is going to be the mechanical aspect of this, and I picked this topic just because this is what I see the most in student writing here at the Writing Center, and this is, for me at least, one of the easiest things to correct in terms of mechanics for writing. So there's no one here in person. I'll ask online. Is anyone familiar with the difference between active and passive voice? No? Okay, good. So then I guess this is a relevant topic to cover. Oh, I wish I could use my whiteboard in here. Let me see what I can do. I'm gonna try and change to a Word document, and hopefully you all can still see it.
Hi, may I share?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Hopefully I described this correctly, but I believe that active voice is when you place the like the noun first, or like for example, like the kids are singing, and then passive you like switch it. Singing are the kids, something like that. Yeah,
right.
sorry, I'm trying my best
you're
to describe it.
you're getting to it. You're pretty much on point with that. And so really what it has to do with active and passive voice is the order in which your subject, object, and verb appear in a sentence. And so the reason this is such an easy exercise, at least for me, is because it just takes identifying your parts of speech and labeling them so that you can see that we are in the correct order. So very simple sentence here for you. We can see that on there?
Yes.
Cool. The boy hit the ball. And so if I were to label this, we have the boy, which is our subject. We have hit, which is our verb. And we have the ball, which is our object. And so in active voice, the simplest construction is a subject doing an action to an object. And so we can see we have SVO as our parts of speech order for active voice. Passive voice looks a little different. There we go. So in this passive voice, we have the same concept, we have the same idea, we have the same action occurring, but there's a couple of things that you might notice right away. Number one, that sentence is longer. I know it's only longer by a couple of words, but percentage-wise, it's like 20% longer. And so when we create passive voice sentences, we are muddying our clarity. We are making our reader do a couple of linguistic acrobats to try and untangle the concept of the sentence. Now, I will say something in terms of language and culture and how they intersect in this moment, because English is a subject-centric language. There are a lot of languages out there that are not subject-centric, that are often verb-centric, and even a few that are object-centric. And so you may feel, depending on what your native language is, what your mother language is, that this passive voice construction makes a little bit more sense or sounds a little bit clearer than the active construction of the same sentence. But what we will do here is you can see that we have ball, which is our object. We have, again, was hit, and our subject, which is the boy. So we still have the same parts of speech, we still have the same concept, but instead we have it in a different order. And so in English, particularly in academic English, the passive voice is more convoluted. It's harder for the reader to untangle, and it creates wordier sentences. And again, something that we see a lot here at the Writing Center is students often feel like more words equals better communication, and that's not always the case. Less words often leads to better communication. And so if we want to retain clarity in our communication and our essays and whatever else we are writing, a simple exercise to do is go through and check your subject, verb, object order and see if you have active voice. See if you have a subject doing an object, doing an action to an object. And to get a little deeper into this, this can be both transitive and intransitive, meaning we can have subjects doing actions to objects outside of themselves, but we can also have subjects doing actions to themselves, as long as we continue to have the subject, verb, object order rather than the passive voice, which is typically object, verb, subject order. One thing I will say, most formatting styles ask for active voice, but there are a few out there. There are some scientific writing, formatting and journal articles, journals out there that ask for the passive voice. And the reason that we ask for they ask for the passive voice is to remove bias in terms of researcher observation. The passive voice allows for, rather than saying we observed X, Y, and Z, we would say X, Y, and Z was observed by the researchers. And so that way we take out what we would consider personal bias in terms of our communication. But for the most part, active voice is not only better, it's clearer, and it gets your reader to the point that you want them to get to faster. So let me go back to my, is that showing up? Do I have to redo it? All right,
Yeah.
let me redo my share.
Okay, there we go.
I'm sure there's a way to just do
There
the
it
whole
is.
thing, yeah. Oh, well. Cool. So, kind of ran through a lot of this. Just some more examples of active voice constructions. LeBron threw the basketball before the buzzer, and so we're creating a little bit more complicated sentences here. But you can see again, even here we have LeBron, which is our subject, threw, which is our verb, and the basketball, which is our object, and then before the buzzer is just our additional information in the sentence. Same thing, LeBron shot the basketball from the free throw line. We still have our subject, verb, object. The rest of this stuff doesn't necessarily matter. And then LeBron scored 3 points. This is a transitive construction. These are intransitive constructions, but you can see how it can go towards an object or it can be past an object. Here's just the same thing. But in passive voice, the ball was thrown by LeBron, the basket was shot by LeBron, the score was made by LeBron. These are more complicated, they're confusing. The basket was shot by LeBron. That can take on all sorts of meanings, right? Because suddenly we don't know who was doing this action or who they were. LeBron gives us context, yes? And so we know LeBron James is a basketball player, but in this, we don't know who was doing the shooting or what type of shooting we're talking about until we get to LeBron, and we can figure out that he is a basketball player. So it really helps your reader understand your concepts better. I'm just going to reiterate what I've been saying. It's more direct and concise. It's like watching LeBron play rather than watching someone in the stands chew gum. You really want to use the active voice as much as possible. Here are some examples of when you might want to use the passive voice. If you are intentionally trying to hide the subject of the sentence to build suspense or lead your reader to a conclusion before you give that to them. If you are intentionally trying to minimize the guilt of the subject. For example, a cheating boyfriend might say, cheating was committed by me, again, to confuse the subject and to confuse what is going on in the sentence. There are times, not often, that passive voice might be required. Passive voice also better emphasizes the main point of the message, such as children were harmed by the drunk driver, right? We don't want the drunk driver to be the focus of this sentence. We want the children to be the focus of the sentence, but they are the object of the verb done by the subject. And so you'll see this sometimes in journalistic writing. But it's a good exercise to keep in mind in terms of when you're reading something, what are they trying to communicate and what are they trying to promote as the most important piece of information in there. So keep that in mind. That's just a soapbox moment when you're listening to news articles and they construct things in passive voice. Why are they trying to do that? These are just a lot more examples. Things. Do we have questions on active and passive voice yet?
No.
No. The big part of this is this to be verb, the linking verbs, right? This is what we often use to connect our subjects to our objects. Here are just a few examples of some of those linking verbs. If you're familiar, I don't think we teach this a whole lot. My daughter's in 7th grade and she hasn't been taught linking verbs and all that other stuff. And so to be is the infinitive form. And then these are all the conjugated forms of to be, past, present, future perfect, et cetera, et cetera. And so everything typically has that to form of the verb conjugated depending on the necessity of the sentence, when it takes place, where it is going, whatever else. Those are like super small mechanical things. However, this is good information if you are not a native speaker of English to be aware of in terms of how English conjugates verbs for the different different time frames that we are trying to communicate. So we'll just do this real quick. I guess there's no one here still, so you want to shout them out or maybe just take a moment to look at these and see if you can identify which one. You don't have to shout them out. Take a minute, go through these and identify which ones are active and which ones are passive. I'll give you like 2 minutes. Just quickly warm up on this. I'll do that. I'll pull up the chat. All right, so why don't we do this? I have the chat pulled up on my screen so we can all see. Can we see the chat on the screen share? No, all right, whatever. I can see it. You all can see it as well. Why don't we do this real quick? I'm going to read the sentence, and if you could just in the chat put A for active, P for passive, and we'll go and check ourselves real quick. So Louise made the chocolate cake, active or passive? A for active, P for passive. Yeah, Good. The chocolate cake was made by Louise. Yeah, I think we all got this. We'll go through these quickly. I won't do the whole things. Let's see what's a little bit more complicated. I hemmed the prom dress, active or passive? Good, good. And he broke the pencil on the floor. Active. All right, good. I think you all got this. Well down. Again, an easy exercise to go back and do on your own with your own writing. So, you know, we talk a lot about proofreading and what does that take? This is a proofreading method to help you clarify your message. And so you can just go through your papers, go through your communications and label subject, verb, object. Make sure that you have that order for your active voice. If you don't have it and you don't want it, you don't want passive voice, it's super easy to change just by switching those things around. But I have one more slide on there with the University Writing Center information, but that is the end. So let me give a quick shout out to the Writing Center and what we can do for you here. Comprehensive writing resource for all UTEP students. And we help in a couple of really big ways. The first thing that we help with is the difference between content and context. Here at the Writing Center, we have student employees that are all different majors. And so we like it when students, say from engineering, come in and sit down with a student from political science. Because if you, as an engineering major, are able to clearly communicate concepts in engineering to someone not in the field, you are doing a good job of communication. So it's not always great, you know, if you're political science, you don't necessarily want to sit with a political science person here because that restricts the knowledge and the communication ability outside of that field. Content-wise, we are not experts. We are not experts in every field. So content is something that you need to bring with you when you come to the Writing Center, meaning that you need to be the subject matter expert in talking about what you are, it's weird. Content experts, you need to be the content experts and come to the Writing Center with an idea of, you know, having good confidence in what you are talking about. We might be able to help you communicate the wrong concept clearly. That's what we are skilled at. And so if you come with the wrong concept or you are communicating the concept incorrectly, we probably won't know that, but we will help you communicate it clearly. Context is understanding the genres of writing, and that's what we are experts in understanding how you operate and perform within different contexts of writing. Essays, research, lab reports, emails, blog posts, white papers, technical papers, all the different genres of writing, we have context. We understand the genres and the reasons that those different genres, we understand the reasons those different genres operate in. The other thing we help out with, which is a really big deal, is something I call brain blindness. This is a human condition problem. You've probably experienced this if you've ever heard a word over and over again. Suddenly that word stops making sense and you're not even sure it's a word anymore. That's brain blindness. And we also get this when we get close to projects. So you've probably read through your paper 100 times and you think, man, that's the best thing I've ever written. And then you turn it in and it gets marked up with all sorts of grammatical errors. It's because your brain started getting used to what you were looking at and it was telling you what you wanted to put and not what you actually put. And so at the Writing Center, we have fresh eyes. We don't have that closeness to the paper. And so we can look through your paper and find those errors in spelling and grammar and small mechanics that are often looked over by the original author. We are located in the library on the main floor, just past the Access Services desk. So when you walk into the library, it's like this nice magical building. You're automatically on the second floor. You're gonna go past Texas Western Cafe with their overpriced pastries and stale coffee. And you're gonna go past Jacob sitting at the Access Services desk and come right into the Writing Center. It's a great location because not only do we collaborate with the reference librarians like Jacob quite a bit, there's all sorts of resources on top of the Writing Center here in the library. I know you all are graduate students, so hopefully you're familiar with the library at this point. But if not, please come by and see all the different things and get familiarized with the resources that are available to you here. This presentation, provided by the Graduate School, the Writing Center as a resource, the Access Services Desk, and the Reference Librarians, we're all here to help you with that research and that building of new knowledge and that communication of new knowledge. And so we are here for your success, and we really want to encourage you to use that as much as possible, because it's going to be a huge part. For me, the writing is a big thing only because you're doing a lot of writing now, and whatever you go on to do after this, graduate school, postgraduate, professional world, writing and communication is still going to be a big part of whatever that is. And we want you to be successful here at the university, but beyond that, once you go on to other things, so that we can say, oh yeah, that person's a UTEP grad. So we want to be able to hang our hats a little bit on your success as well. And writing and communication is going to be a big part of that. So Writing Center's free. Access to the reference librarians is free. They have specialized. Do you want to talk about the reference librarians a little bit? Maybe.
Yeah. So again, this is Jacob. So I'm one of the Access Services librarians. So if you're ever stuck, you need help finding information. You need help finding these sources that are going to inform your own arguments. Finding those older sources that are going to inform your own research. If you need help finding those sources, that's where the library comes in. We can point you to different resources, books, articles, databases, journals, how to navigate those sources. That's where the library comes in. So right before the Writing Center, if you're stuck, you can talk to a librarian at the Access Services Desk, and we'll be able to help you out. You can also talk to us online through our library website. You can either email us, or during the day we have a chat service. So you can instant message us, and a librarian is going to be available, and we'll be able to help you out. And once you find those sources and you need help integrating them, citing them, then you would come to Lou in the Writing Center.
Perfect. So I think that about wraps it up. Are there any questions before we sign off for the day? You are welcome to stop by the Writing Center, talk with me, talk with any of our consultants, get a feel for what we're doing. I know the Access Services Desk and the Reference Librarians, there's always someone out there waiting, just waiting for someone to come by with a question. So again, I would really encourage you all to use it. It's free, right? This is a lot of what your tuition pays for. So, take full advantage of it.